February 1961. Marilyn Monroe, the world's biggest movie star, made a phone call that would save her life. "Joe, if you don't get me out of here in the next hour, I swear to God I'll kill myself." Her voice was shaking, terrified, desperate. She wasn't calling from a hotel or a movie set. She was calling from inside the Payne Whitney Psychiatric Clinic in New York, where she'd been locked behind steel doors for 3 days. The doctors told her it was for her own good. The nurses said she needed treatment. But Marilyn knew the truth. She'd been trapped, betrayed, and imprisoned in a place where screaming patients wandered the halls, where electroshock therapy rooms waited with leather straps, and where her celebrity status meant absolutely nothing. This is the true story of how Marilyn Monroe's ex-husband Joe DiMaggio orchestrated her commitment to a mental institution, the 72 hours of hell she endured behind those locked doors, and the dramatic rescue that finally set her free. What happened in that psychiatric ward would haunt Marilyn for the rest of her short life. Let's dive into this story together. If you love these kinds of unknown true Hollywood stories, please don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because there are so many more shocking moments in Marilyn's life that you've never heard about. At the beginning of 1961, Marilyn Monroe was at her breaking point. Her marriage to Arthur Miller had ended. Her last film, The Misfits, was a critical and commercial disappointment, and she felt more alone than ever. Insomnia had been chasing her for years, but now even the pills weren't working anymore. Her doctor, psychoanalyst Dr. Marion Crease, noticed that Marilyn's condition was getting worse. She'd been treating Marilyn for years and knew her deepest fears, her childhood traumas, her mother's history of insanity. Dr. Crease made Marilyn a suggestion: a few days of hospital rest, a controlled environment, regular medication doses, medical supervision, and most importantly, away from the pressure of the outside world. Marilyn hesitated because she didn't like hospitals, but she trusted Dr. Crease. "Just a few days," the doctor said. "Rest, recover, and come back strong." Marilyn agreed. This would be the biggest mistake of her life. On the morning of February 7, 1961, Marilyn was taken by ambulance to Payne Whitney Psychiatric Clinic. She hadn't been told the name of the clinic, just that it was a special rest facility. When she walked through the door, the first thing she noticed was the silence, suffocating, disturbing silence. A nurse came, smiled warmly, and asked Marilyn to sign some forms. Marilyn, tired and confused, signed without reading. Among those forms was a voluntary admission document, a paper stating that Marilyn had come to the hospital of her own free will and couldn't leave without the doctor's approval. But nobody explained this to Marilyn. The nurse took her to the 8th floor, the East Wing. When the elevator doors opened, Marilyn froze at what she saw. This wasn't a rest facility. This was a mental hospital. In the corridor were patients walking around in pajamas. Some were talking to themselves. One woman was banging her head against the wall. Marilyn turned to the nurse. "There must be a mistake. I don't belong on this floor." The nurse was still smiling. "This is room 8. Please go inside." When Marilyn entered that room, her heart was pounding. The room was small, sterile, and the windows had thick metal bars. A bed, a chair, a sink. The walls were painted pale green, that mental hospital green. Marilyn immediately tried to leave, but the door was locked from the outside. She knocked on the door, then banged, then pounded. "Hey, there's been a mistake. I'm in the wrong place." The nurse looked through the small window. "Calm down, Miss Monroe. The doctor will see you soon." Marilyn panicked. The nurse made notes and walked away. Marilyn stayed at the door, screamed, begged, but nobody came back. Hours passed. Then she heard sounds from the hallway. Screams, crying sounds, someone pleading, "No, please, no," and then sudden silence. Dinner was passed through a small slot, as if Marilyn were a dangerous animal. When night came, the lights were turned off, but Marilyn couldn't sleep. The sounds from the hallway never stopped. Screams, moans, footsteps. At one point, the small window in the door opened and an eye looked in. 15 minutes later, it opened again, another eye, then disappeared. Marilyn understood. They were checking on her every 15 minutes, doing patient observation. No privacy, no peace, Toward morning, Marilyn finally fell asleep from exhaustion, but 2 hours later the nurses woke her to give her medication, big white pills. "What are these?" Marilyn asked. "Your treatment," the nurse said. Marilyn refused to take them. The nurse made notes and left. The next morning, Marilyn pounded on the door again and shouted, "I want to see my lawyer. I want to make a phone call. Let me out of here." A nurse came, older and more stern. "Miss Monroe, the faster you calm down and cooperate, the faster you'll get out, but your current behavior tells us something else." Marilyn screamed, "My behavior? You locked me in a room. I'm not crazy. I'm Marilyn Monroe." The nurse looked at her with pity and shook her head. "Yes, dear, we're aware of that." In that moment, Marilyn understood a terrifying truth. Every protest, every claim of "I'm Marilyn Monroe" was being evaluated as a sign of megalomania. The more she resisted, the crazier she looked. She was trapped in a psychological catch-22 with no way out. In the afternoon, a doctor came. A young psychiatrist wearing glasses, carrying files. "How are you, Miss Monroe?" he asked. Marilyn lost control. "You locked me in a room. I came here to rest, not to a mental hospital ward." The doctor took notes. "Dr. Chris approved your admission here. A two-signature commitment. You came voluntarily and you currently need treatment." Marilyn looked at him in shock. "Voluntarily? I didn't even know this was a mental hospital." The doctor nodded. "Miss Monroe, there's a history of mental illness in your family. Your mother was diagnosed with schizophrenia. You've been experiencing depression, insomnia, suicidal thoughts in recent months. Being here is in your best interest." Marilyn's eyes filled with tears. "Suicidal thoughts? Who said that?" The doctor stood up. "We'll observe you for a few days, then we'll determine your treatment plan." Marilyn desperately asked, "What kind of treatment?" The doctor stopped, turned and answered in a cold voice, "Depends on your condition. Maybe medication therapy, maybe more." On the afternoon of the second day, Marilyn was taken out into the hallway for a supervised walk. A woman approached Marilyn and whispered, "Are you going to get treatment too?" Marilyn asked. "What treatment?" The woman gestured with her eyes toward a door at the end of the hall. "Electric treatment. Electroshock. They call it therapy, but it's torture. They strap you down with leather restraints, put plastic in your mouth, and then..." The woman couldn't finish her sentence because a nurse came and took her away. But Marilyn had heard. Electroshock. In 1961, it was still widely used, controversial, and in most patients led to memory loss, personality changes, and sometimes permanent brain damage. Marilyn knew this because some of her actor friends had undergone this treatment. Frances Farmer, one of Hollywood's bright stars, had been committed to a mental hospital and subjected to electroshock therapy for years. When she left the hospital, she was no longer the same person. Marilyn panicked. She asked the nurse, "Are they going to give me electroshock?" The nurse frowned. "That's the doctor's decision. If you don't continue to cooperate, if you don't calm down, treatment may be necessary." This was a threat, a clear, direct threat. Either she would stay quiet and maybe be released in a few weeks, or she would continue to resist and be forced into electroshock therapy. When Marilyn returned to her room that night, she completely collapsed. She fell to the floor and cried for hours. "I have to get out of here," she whispered. But how? The doors were locked, the windows were barred, there was no phone, no connection to the outside world. That night Marilyn couldn't sleep. She sat on the bed and thought. Dr. Chris had betrayed her. The woman she'd trusted for years, the therapist she'd shared her most intimate secrets with, had locked her in here. From the hallway came screams again, someone shouting, "No, let me go," then dragging sounds, and then the sound of the electroshock room door closing. Marilyn covered her ears but still heard it, a distant, muffled scream, and then silence. Another patient had been treated, and Marilyn knew if she didn't do something, she would be next. On the morning of the third day, Marilyn made a decision. She had to reach the outside world somehow. When breakfast came, she talked to the nurse, this time in a calm voice. "Please, can I make a phone call? I just want to call one person." The nurse looked suspicious. "Who are you going to call?" Marilyn thought. Then one person came to mind, Joe DiMaggio, her ex-husband, the man she'd divorced years ago. But Marilyn knew Joe still loved her. She could trust him. "My ex-husband," Marilyn said. "Joe DiMaggio." Hours passed. Then in the afternoon, the door opened and the nurse came in. "You have 5 minutes. You'll be monitored." Marilyn dialed the number with trembling hands. The phone rang. On the fourth ring, Joe answered. "Hello?" Marilyn almost cried. "Joe, it's me, Marilyn." Joe's voice suddenly became alarmed. "Marilyn, where are you? Did something happen?" Marilyn whispered. "Joe, they locked me in a mental hospital. Payne Whitney, New York. I've been here for 3 days. You need to get me out. If you don't, Joe, I swear I'll kill myself. They're going to give me electroshock treatment. Please, Joe, you're my only hope." There was anger in Joe's voice. "What? Who did this?" He cursed. "Marilyn, listen to me. Stay calm. Stay there. I'm coming. I'll bring a lawyer. I'll tear down the hospital if I have to, but I'm getting you out of there, okay? Trust me." Marilyn whispered through tears. "Okay, Joe. Hurry. Please hurry." The nurse hung up the phone. "Your time is up." Marilyn was taken back to her room, but now there was a small light of hope inside her. Joe was coming. Joe would save her. She just had to hold on. A few more hours. She knew Joe. When he said something, he did it. Night came. Marilyn lay down on the bed, didn't sleep, just waited. She heard Joe's voice in her head over and over. "I'm coming. I'll get you out." She held on to that. Joe DiMaggio sprang into action the moment he hung up the phone. He called his lawyer. "Marilyn Monroe is being held at a psychiatric clinic. Prepare every legal document you need now." Second, he called one of his old teammates. "You need to find the director of Payne Whitney, and you need to tell him this. If anything happens to Marilyn Monroe, if they give her electroshock therapy, I'm going to the press. I'll destroy the hospital." Third, Joe jumped in his car and headed to Payne Whitney. He would do anything for Marilyn. When Joe arrived at the hospital, the woman at reception recognized him. Joe's voice trembled with anger. "I'm here to see Marilyn Monroe, and I'm taking her out of here." The receptionist hesitated. Joe slammed his fist on the desk. "Call the director now, or I'll make such a scene here that tomorrow morning every newspaper headline will be about the Payne Whitney scandal." 10 minutes later, the director, Dr. Howard, came downstairs. Negotiations lasted an hour. Joe suggested a transfer to another hospital. Dr. Howard agreed. Then he said, "Now I'm going to see her, right now." When they reached Marilyn's room, Joe looked through the small window in the door. Marilyn was sitting on the bed, knees pulled to her chest, rocking back and forth. Her hair was messy, her face was pale. Joe's heart broke. "Open this door now." The door opened. Joe walked in. Marilyn lifted her head, saw Joe, and for a moment couldn't believe it. Then Joe spoke. "Marilyn, I came. I'm taking you out." Marilyn jumped up and threw her arms around Joe. She started crying, uncontrollably, in sobs. Joe, I knew you'd come. I knew it, but I was scared, so scared." Joe held her tight. "It's over. It's over now. We're leaving." Marilyn pulled her head back. "Really? Can we leave?" Joe smiled. "Yes, we're leaving." The procedures took an hour. Papers were signed. Transfer documents were prepared. Throughout all this, Joe never left Marilyn's side. He held her hand, stood by her. When they got in the elevator, going down, Marilyn whispered to Joe, "What if they bring me back?" Joe looked at her. "Even on my deathbed, I won't let them bring you back. I promise." The elevator doors opened. The exit door. Marilyn walked toward that door, getting closer to freedom with each step. The moment they walked out the door, the cold February air hit her face. But to Marilyn, this was the most beautiful air in the world. The air of freedom. They got into Joe's car. The car started moving. Payne Whitney Psychiatric Clinic was left behind. Marilyn didn't look back. Joe took Marilyn to Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in Manhattan, a completely different hospital. Here Marilyn stayed for 3 weeks, voluntarily, in her own control. Doctors evaluated Marilyn, and the result was clear. There was no predisposition to schizophrenia, no psychosis, no mental illness. There was severe depression, sleep disorder, and chronic anxiety, but these were treatable conditions. The admission to Payne Whitney was completely unnecessary, even harmful. Marilyn began to recover at Columbia. Joe came to visit every day. Marilyn told him about what she experienced at Payne Whitney, the locked doors, the screams, the electroshock threats. Joe listened with anger. Marilyn shook her head. "I just want to forget. I just never want to talk to that woman again." And indeed, Marilyn never did therapy with Dr. Chris again. Years of relationship, trust, all of it had been destroyed in those 3 days. After leaving Columbia, Marilyn went to Florida, to Joe's house. She stayed there for 2 weeks, by the ocean. Joe took care of her, cooked for her, and just was there. Marilyn slowly began to recover in Florida, but the nights were still difficult. She had nightmares. She saw that locked room at Payne Whitney, those screams, those electroshock room threats in her dreams. Joe comforted her. "You're here. You're safe. You'll never go back there again." In the spring of 1961, Marilyn slowly returned to work, but she wasn't the same anymore. The Payne Whitney experience had changed her, permanently. She was more cautious now, more suspicious, and more fragile. When filming began on Something's Got to Give, she started showing up late to sets. Sometimes she didn't come at all. She forgot her lines. Something had broken inside Marilyn at Payne Whitney, and it couldn't be repaired. Fear had settled inside her, deep and constant. The system could capture her again. She increased her sleeping pills. Nembutal, Seconal, phenobarbital. Doctors warned with concern, but Marilyn didn't listen. The pills put her to sleep, and when she slept, she didn't see that locked room. Her friends worried. "Marilyn, you've been different since Payne Whitney." Marilyn answered, "Yes, I'm different, because now I know how easily trust can be lost, and I will never, ever be under anyone's control again." In the summer of 1962, in the final months of Marilyn's life, she called Joe DiMaggio again. "Joe, can we talk again?" Joe immediately agreed. He went to Marilyn's house. Marilyn had lost a lot of weight, dark circles under her eyes. They sat down and Marilyn talked. She talked about Payne Whitney, about how those 3 days had changed her. "Joe, sometimes I think maybe they were right. Maybe I really am crazy." Joe held her hand. "Marilyn, you're not crazy. You're a damaged person, yes, but you're not crazy, and I'm still here." Marilyn smiled. "Why, Joe? Why are you still here?" Joe answered, "Because some bonds don't break, Marilyn. I never stopped loving you. Never." Marilyn started crying. "I wish we could get married again, Joe. I wish everything was different." Joe comforted her. "Maybe one day. Maybe when you heal." This conversation gave Marilyn hope, but fate had other plans. 2 months later, in August 1962, Marilyn was found dead in her Brentwood home from a drug overdose. Officially, it was ruled probable suicide, but the truth was never fully understood. When Marilyn died, one of the first to find out was Joe DiMaggio. "No, this can't be right." But it was. Marilyn was gone. Joe immediately flew to Los Angeles. He went to Marilyn's house. Joe sat on the bed and cried for hours. Then he organized Marilyn's funeral. A small private ceremony. Hollywood stars weren't invited because Joe knew they were part of the system that killed Marilyn. At the funeral, Joe stood at Marilyn's casket and whispered, "I'm sorry, Marilyn. I couldn't save you. I saved you from Payne Whitney, but in the end I couldn't save you." Joe later talked about Payne Whitney in an interview. "That hospital broke Marilyn. Those 3 days killed something inside her. I got her out of there, but the damage was already done. She was never the same woman again. She became more fearful, more suspicious, more alone. And in the end, that loneliness killed her." For the rest of his life, Joe sent flowers to Marilyn's grave every week. For 20 years without fail, red roses. And Joe never married again. After Marilyn, there could be no one else. Marilyn Monroe's 3 days at Payne Whitney were among the darkest moments of her life. But this isn't just her story. Thousands of people experienced similar traumas. Mental hospitals in the 1960s were places of fear, places of control. What does Marilyn's story teach us? First, trust is fragile. Even people you've trusted for years can betray you. Second, the system can abuse its power. Third, trauma is permanent. Marilyn left Payne Whitney, but Payne Whitney never left her. Those 3 days followed her for the rest of her life. Today, more than 60 years later, mental hospitals have changed. Patient rights have been strengthened. But there are still problems. Marilyn's story reminds us we must be careful. We shouldn't blindly trust systems. And most importantly, we must believe and support people who experience trauma. Marilyn screamed for help for 3 days, but nobody listened until Joe came. Joe believed her. Joe saved her. But the question is, how many people couldn't find their Joe? How many people are still behind locked doors, screaming for help? Marilyn Monroe's grave is still visited today. People leave flowers, leave lipstick marks, and remember her. But most remember only the Hollywood star, her beauty, her fame, her tragedy. Few people know about Payne Whitney, about those 3 days, about the locked doors, the screams, the electroshock threats. But this story is perhaps her most important story, because this story shows power, control, betrayal, and the struggle to survive. Marilyn survived those 3 days. She got out thanks to Joe. But the marks remained, deep marks, and those marks may have ultimately contributed to the things that killed her. Payne Whitney didn't kill Marilyn, but it opened a fatal wound in her, and that wound never healed.